FAB Chicks family. Welcome to another episode of the FAB Chicks Podcast. We are your hosts, Indy and Nicole.
And I'm Sherelle, and we're excited for today's episode because we're diving into a conversation that's so necessary. Mental health matters, breaking the stigma on mental health in Black women.
That's right. And if we're honest, so many of us grew up in environments where mental health wasn't really talked about, or worse, it was dismissed. I know for a fact that was my experience. You would hear phrases like, "Oh, girl, just pray about it," or "Black women don't do therapy. We don't have time to be weak." But here's the truth: mental health is just important as physical health, and we need to talk about it.
And today we have the perfect guest to help us unpack this conversation, Dr. Danielle Dickens.
Yes. So Dr. Dickens is a Black feminist social psychologist, professor at the renowned Spelman College, and author of The Psychology of Black Womanhood. She researches how Black women navigate identity, mental health, and professional spaces. And today she's bringing all of that wisdom to the FAB Chicks table. So let's welcome Dr. Danielle Dickens.
Yay. Thank you all for having me. Thank you.
Yes. So let's start with your journey, Dr. Dickens. What inspired you to focus on your research on identity development and mental health of Black women?
Yeah, so it started really with my journey at Spelman. So I attended Spelman for undergrad. My mom went to Spelman, so I was forced to go to Spelman, but I'm glad she forced me to go there. But it started there with learning so much about my history and about what it meant to be a Black woman, and taking a lot of courses such as we have to take African diaspora in the world. And so that was my first really introduction to learning about the history of Black women and centering Black women in a lot of my studies and courses. And when I was an undergrad student, I started doing research with my advisor, who's a still professor at Morehouse, Dr. Sinead Young. And we actually started doing research with her on HIV and AIDS within the Black community. So that was my first kind of interest. And then I went to graduate school. I ended up in Colorado. And so I grew up here in Atlanta. And so I went to Colorado State University, to get my master's and PhD in applied social and health psychology. So I went there, thought I was going to continue along the same lines of research, looking at like perceived risk associated with HIV and AIDS. And it wasn't that many Black people there. And so it was, in some ways, culture shock for me. The Black population in Fort Collins was like less than 2%. Wow. And so I found myself being like the only Black person, the only Black woman in a lot of spaces, and, on campus and outside of campus. And so I was just like, I want to study this more. I want to understand more about Black women's experiences, and thinking about my own at Spelman, and then coming to a place like Colorado, in Colorado State in particular, where I was the only one in a lot of spaces. And so that started my journey of looking at studying Black women's experiences, particularly as it relates to their identity and how they navigate different spaces where they are the only one, or where they're in spaces where they have a sense of belonging. And so that's where my research shifted. And I made a commitment then. I was like, I'm going to do everything Black women. So all my research is going to focus on Black women. And then it really, as I think about my career, I taught at the University of Georgia after getting my PhD at Colorado State University. And then with Spelman, I always say like the position was, created for me, because when it came open, they were looking for someone whose research focused on Black women. And someone that can teach, courses on psychology of Black women. And so that was my focus. And so then coming to being a professor at Spelman in August will be 10 years.
Oh, wow.
And it allowed me even more to explore the diverse experiences of Black women and to teach Black women. And a lot of my research topics really come from my community. Like, what are some things I'm experiencing, my family, my friends, and my students? And so being at a space like Spelman as a professor just continues to allow me to get the support that I need to do research on Black women. I love that I'm not questioned, right, for the type of research that I do.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yes,
Thank you.
definitely interesting. I mean, I definitely can identify with being the only Black woman in spaces throughout my career.
Yeah.
So, and yes, the mental toll that it took on
Yeah.
me. So, since you've done extensive research on identity shifting, where Black women feel like they have to adjust parts of themselves depending on where they are, can you break down what this looks like and how much it impacts mental health?
Yeah, so I started doing this research for my dissertation, and it was stemmed from the book that came out in the early 2000s, Shifting the Double Lives of Black Women. And so it was a book published by Jones and Shorter Gooden, and I was just inspired by that book. And so when I came to think about my dissertation, I was like, I want to do something around that. And so a lot of us are familiar with code switching, right? Altering the way that you talk. And
Yes.
so after reading that book, I was like, and I also think about my experiences in Colorado. I was like, okay, I'm doing more than code switching. I'm also altering the way that I present myself, such as my appearance, even my perspective, my behaviors, in order to really fit into this space, and particularly in some cases to maybe lessen the impact of experiencing discrimination. And so that's essentially what identity shifting is, right? It's altering the way that you talk, behave, your appearance and perspectives to, particularly for Black women, to navigate oppressive contexts and or to enhance their social and professional relationships with other Black people. And so a lot of my research on shifting has looked at it from like a benefits and costs type of perspective. But going back to your question about some examples and what it looks like is that it can be a Black woman deciding to wear her hair straight for an interview instead of in its natural, state curls or locks. Even it can be a Black woman deciding about, is this attire that I'm wearing in this professional setting, is it deemed as being too tight fitting because I don't want to come across in a particular way or confirm certain stereotypes as it relates to Black women. And it may be a Black woman deciding to lower her tone so that she doesn't appear or come across as being aggressive or angry, right? Even though she may have the right to be angry, right? And so those are some examples of particularly what it can look like in different spaces. But on the positive end, right, it may look like, particularly within the Black community, it may look like kind of altering, a little bit of the code switching in order to, enhance the relationship with other Black people, right? And we see that when it comes to like networking, right? You're trying to get a feel for and try to find some similarities, right, with other people so that you can enhance, in some ways, build a social or professional network. So a lot of my research has found that there's more cost to shifting, but I also want to recognize that, a lot of our ancestors have been doing it for so long. And so there are some benefits to it, but a lot of my research has shown that there are more costs associated with it.
And I'm so glad that you touched on all that. I mean, it's a lot to unpack, and I could be here all day talking
Yeah.
about it. But just in my
Very.
career, only Black woman in management, a lot of times, yes. I mean, I came with my hair the way it is. Like, that's just what you're going to get. I wore my nails with the designs on it. But
Yeah.
yeah, just even putting a longer cardigan over my skirt if I had on a pencil skirt because I didn't want, my
Yep.
butt to I could wear the same thing as another person, a white girl, and because she doesn't have the curves that I have, it could be perceived as being, enticing or my clothes are too tight. So wearing a longer cardigan,
Yeah.
definitely the code switch. And I mean, I'm from
Mhm.
East Point. And
Mhm.
so, there's a dialect we use in East
Mhm.
Point, and maybe that won't translate well over in corporate America. And
Mhm.
so, going into my new job over a year and a half ago, I was just like, you're going to get what you're going to get. Like,
Mhm.
this is trail, and you
Yeah.
don't like it, guess what? It does not impact my work, right? And
Yeah.
if I want to use slang, I know how to be professional and the
Yeah.
appropriate time to use it, but you're going to get me authentically who I am.
Yes. No, I love that. And a lot of times some people ask me when I do this type of research of like, about, how Black women shift or not shift and kind of like, do I have to do this or not? And I always say that, and I do want to put out there that a lot of Black women don't shift, right? They resist. And I love it because we do have to be more of our authentic selves within these different spaces, especially in the workplace where we're spending majority of our time there.
Right.
But I always say if you are going to shift and not to shift things that are important to what you value, right?
Right.
So, like, for instance, as you talked about your hair, like, same. Like, maybe when I was starting off, I probably shifted a little bit more. And then now with certain things, when I think more about the things that I value, particularly as it relates to my identity as a Black woman and, certain workplaces. Yes, it's easier for me to do it at Spelman, but I think about even when I'm navigating and going to different conferences, it's like, however I want to wear my hair, that's how I'm going to wear it. Right. And that's something that I value. It's an important part of my identity. And so maybe, for instance, I still code switch in certain spaces. But it's not something that I don't feel like, if I do it, that I'm losing a part of myself.
Right.
But if I, didn't wear, if I felt forced to wear my hair in a particular way, then I would feel like I'm losing, a part of my identity.
Right.
Those are some of the things that you mentioned are really important, and it's reflective too in the research.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And I can honestly attest to the same, coming from a property management background where from the corporate aspect, there are plenty of people who don't look like me. And so because I had some of the lower positions, I wasn't necessarily in corporate at first. I would have to kind of switch to, and I felt like I would have to do that to suit their fancy. But I think I just came to a point after dealing with like just straight up racism on a job, being the only woman of color in management on a property, and having to endure like even being physically attacked by a white woman. It changed everything in me. And so now I am true to who I am. I show up as India. I'm going to be the light in the dark space, and I'm not going to compromise on that. And so I feel a lot better, like you said, if it takes you away from the true essence of your identity, it's not okay. But if it's a situation to where you feel like, yes, it's going to grow your network, it's going to open up a door that may not necessarily be open to you, I get it. It's, to me, it's no different than the gift of gab when you have that ability to, and we do that. I think that that's a part of the magic that we possess. Because even my daughter will say sometimes, you don't sound like that. Why? How do you do that? So it's funny. Girl, I code switch on these men, honey. You get the soft boys. Hey. So, just mental health stigma. So back to the breaking the stigma for the EP. Mental health stigma is real in our community. So why do you think Black women in particular struggle with acknowledging mental health issues?
Yeah, I think it's due to a couple things, and some of it is the ways in which we have been socialized, and we've been socialized, and sometimes it has been, passed down from generation to generation. That, like kind of as you mentioned earlier, that you just, if you're having an issue, you just pray about it, right? Or if you're having, something that's impacting your mental health and it's related to your family, you've always been told you keep it in the family, right? You don't share that information with anyone else. And so also when we think about the strong Black woman, that's an important part of Black women's identity and identity development. And so though I'm kind of similar to shifting, though there are some, positive aspects of it, but also what we're finding that it is associated with negative, mental health outcomes, right? The more Black women identify as a strong Black woman or take on this idea that they have to put the needs of others before their own, that they have to appear as if they have everything together, and that can be associated with higher levels of anxiety and depressive symptoms. And so, in a lot of the research, a lot of Black women identify as a strong Black woman. And so I think that contributes to, the stigma. And then also, we just have so much that we have to combat, right, within the Black community, particularly as Black women, like different stressors, and think about the impact of racism and sexism and other isms on our, physical and mental health. And so sometimes I think Black women have been socialized to kind of put it to the back burner. Like, okay, I have to focus on this. I have to take care of, my parents or my family or my children. And so they kind of put their mental health on the back burner. And so those are things, I think, some of the things that contribute to it, and maybe not feeling like they can get help for it.
Yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned the strong Black woman narrative. I mean, yes, as you said, it can lead to anxiety, depression, high blood pressure. I found myself years ago, a lot of my friends would say, but you're so strong, or my coworkers, you're so strong. And I'm like, okay, that's a problem, because people think being strong means you don't need help. And that is totally not the case. So I stopped identifying a long time ago as a strong Black woman because it was not serving me, right? I 100% believe in therapy. I know growing up, a lot of us were told, therapy is a white woman's thing or a white person's thing, and you don't need to go to counseling, just seek Jesus and pray about it, as India said before. My parents, I would say my mother mostly, once I got in college, would say you need to go to therapy. She's never been to therapy a day in her life, but she would tell me that I need to go to therapy. So my first time going to therapy was in college when I was in my early 20s, and I didn't keep it up. But I battled with depression and anxiety. And instead of being prescribed medication, I was just like, we got to figure out something, right? So, yeah, definitely letting go of the strong Black woman narrative is something extremely important.
It is. It really is. And I can honestly attest to that. I think we come from, even just aside from Black, but especially Black community, but I think with our generation from our parents, like that whole baby boomer generation, they come from something different. And I think when I think about it, and I had to really give my mom grace because I'm like, here it is. My mom is 71. She grew up in an era where it was still segregation. It was things that, the way that she came up, you had to be strong. So it was like she took that and kind of pushed it on me. And it was like when we were having issues when I was coming up, it's like, well, mom, we in church every Sunday. Why we not talking to the pastor? I don't want them folks in my business. You know what I mean? Like that was the typical response. Like what goes on in this house stays in this house. And it's so unfortunate because I think so many of us have experienced a level of trauma that followed us into adulthood. This was trauma that occurred as an adolescent, and we weren't able to shake it because we didn't know how to navigate through that. You know what I mean? And so, of course, we are the FAB Chicks Podcast, faith filled, authentic, and bold, and we want the focus to be on faith and finding strength in our faith, but we also need to navigate it in a way to where we're not separating spiritual wellness and mental wellness. And so I would say, why do you think Black women in particular, I guess, kind of like have a problem separating spiritual wellness and mental health instead of treating them as, them together, like they're not separate?
No, I agree with everything that you said. One thing that comes to mind, I think we're seeing a shift in terms of pastors talking more about mental health, but I think that historically, I don't know if it's been mentioned a lot, from the pastor, the preacher at the pulpit about mental health. And we talk about it. I know we'll get to a little bit later in the book, Psychology of Black Womanhood. And we have a chapter on Black women's religion and spirituality of, Black women are the highest group, racial and gender group within the U.S. that are religious and or spiritual. And so, like I said, I think we're seeing a shift, but oftentimes it may not be mentioned, particularly, during sermons about mental health. But as you mentioned, it's such an integral part. And you think about it as like, in order for us to, fulfill our purpose, we have to be whole, right? We have to make sure that we are physically, mentally healthy, and to center on our wellness in order to fulfill what we were called on this earth to do and to be. And so, and like I said, I think sometimes too, it's the ways in which it was taught, that it was taught separate, that that's something different, or that I've heard over the years of how it's been taught, like if you do have a mental disorder, that is something wrong that you did, right? I think there's this misinformation that's being taught out there too about mental disorders and mental health. And I think that leads to the stigma as well, and how Black women some may have been taught to separate them out because of what they've been told. And unfortunately, some of that I think has perpetuated the mental health stigma.
Yeah.
Definitely. So with it being such a stigma with Black people and mental health or just therapy in general, what type of strategies do you have for reshaping the conversation on therapy in the Black community? I know my pastor talks about going to therapy. The pastor that I had, I would say not growing up, but once I hit about 16, we went to a different church. And that pastor, well-known pastor here in Atlanta, would speak about needing to go to counseling. And he would basically tell his congregation, that he goes to therapy, and he suggests that they also go to therapy, and they also have programs inside of the church where they have
Yeah.
therapists that they can pair you with that will, give free services because the church pays for it. So
Yeah.
with all of this being available, they still don't have a lot of people that are making use of that. So how would you reshape the conversations on therapy in the Black community?
Yeah, and I'm glad you mentioned all that too, because that's also what we write about in the textbook is that a lot of, like you said, churches have mental health, physical health programs as a part of their various initiatives, and I think that's a start. I think with stigma, it's related to people's attitudes, and so sometimes it can be very difficult to change people's attitudes. Some of the things or strategies is that exactly what you just shared is like churches starting to, integrate it within as a part of their initiatives. I think that more people sharing about their experiences with mental health challenges and or seeking out therapy. And I know that I do that with my students, and I hope that I try to change the stigma with that of just sharing my own experiences. And I tell them even now, like I can't get through the things that I get through without, my going to my therapy sessions, right? It's so integral to, navigating, even if it's just day-to-day stressors and challenges. So I think one is that, more people talking openly within the Black community about their own mental health challenges and seeking out therapy and the benefits of therapy. Also, what we see too is, celebrities. We know that people are still influenced by celebrities within the Black community. I mean, all communities, but particularly in the Black community. And so, I know Taraji P. Henson and others have spoke out about their, mental health journey or have started different programs to combat the stigma, mental health stigma within the Black communities. I think those are certain things that we can begin to do to break the ice, to make it in a way seem more common, because it is, right? A lot of people, I can't think of the percentage, but a lot of people have some percentage, right, or level of, rather being anxiety. I think anxiety is kind of one of the most common mental health disorders, though one may not be diagnosed with it, but a lot of people have anxiety related symptoms. And so I think the more and more we talk about it within the Black community, within these different spaces that are influential, whether it be the church or different celebrities on social media, as a way, I think the more and more we do that, we begin to normalize it. So it's not seen as a stigma, but it can be challenging. Because like I said, I think within, from a psychology perspective, it's difficult to change people's attitudes. But like the more consistency that there are in these messages around that, it's like human nature to have anxiety and depressive symptoms depending upon what you may be going through. And so once we begin to normalize it and talk more about it, I think that can begin to break down the stigma. But it can be challenging.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so glad you said that, especially about normalizing and talking about it. I know for a fact, even me personally, this time last year, I was struggling, like really bad. And I had a full blown anxiety attack at work, had to be transported, the whole nine. And it was a scary situation for me because I had never experienced anxiety to that level. And, here I am sitting in front of my primary care physician, and she's like, yeah, well, I'm diagnosing you with anxiety and severe depression. And I'm like, what? Where is this coming from? But I wasn't even present enough to realize, India, you are depressed right now. You have some things going on that you have not dealt with. There are some things that you have not prioritized as it pertains to your mental health. And so I had to reel that thing back in. And it took me seeking help through therapy and, of course, prayer and, meditation and affirming myself to adjust my crown and be back in that position. So I asked you, Dr. Dickens, like, for someone like me or, who may not even be aware of what's going on, that they're even dealing with that, how would you say that you could help, or just a word of advice for a woman to be able to prioritize her mental health, like today? If somebody's listening to this show and they want to prioritize, what is something that they can do today, like right now?
Yeah, I think one of the things is exactly what you're saying about thinking about what you prioritize, and in some ways doing like an assessment of that. Because oftentimes the things that we may want to or should be focusing on, we're not prioritizing that. We're prioritizing something else. And so I think one thing is just think about one action item that one can do to, start small, and what's, one action item so that you can give more time to prioritize if it is, your mental health or physical health. And so one of the things I think it could be is that, okay, I'm going to commit to maybe 3 days out of the week, I'm going to listen to a mindfulness session, right? Or if it's, this was something that, for me, like you said, the integral part of your faith and mental health that I recognized for myself recently is that it's like I pray every day, but sometimes I wasn't intentional about it. Like in the morning, I would just pop up and like go on about my day. And then throughout the day, I would talk to God. But I was like, okay, I need to be more, because sometimes I would just forget, which is bad. So my action item was that I set an alarm. So I'm like, okay, the first thing, so I set my alarm, just like, okay, instead of like my first alarm being like, wake up, my first alarm is to pray. And so we can just think about like one action item that we can do, and then you kind of add on to it. So that's just an example, for me. Or if it can be that I'm going to, journaling can really help with your mental health. So if it's say, okay, I'm going to start, even if I can't do it every day, I'm going to commit to journaling at least 3 times out of the week. Or I may start once a week, right? And then you kind of build up. Or I'm going to commit to, when I wake up, they say too, this helps if you think about what you're grateful for. That can also increase your mental health. And that's also connected to your faith and spirituality. And so we can think about one thing that we can do, one action item, even though it may appear to be small, it can actually have a lot of benefit to our mental health.
Yeah. Definitely. And 2 of the ones that you mentioned are things that I incorporated, I would say, at the end of last year. I journal, but not consistently. And I get weird, taking a journal around, or because I want to put things down right when I think, about it. Because, the day gets away and then you forgot to journal. So I found an app that I use. I think it's called Day One. And it allows you to journal right on your phone. It'll even send you text reminders that you can literally text yourself kind of, and it'll log it into your journal. And then of course the wake up in the morning, and the first thing I think about is, what am I grateful for? And so it's something I told my daughter the other day as well, to try to shape her mind, right? If you start out with positive, usually that will set the tone for your day. If you start out with negative, it's going to be negative, right? So definitely those are 2 things that have helped me. And in addition to that, I go to therapy every other Wednesday.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, absolutely. So your book, The Psychology of Black Womanhood, is such an important resource. I mean, it's in depth. Like I was looking through some of the chapters and I'm like, oh my goodness, this is awesome.
Thank you.
So can you tell us about it and how it helps Black women navigate mental health and identity?
Yes, thank you. So Psychology of Black Womanhood is a text that was published last year by myself and Dr. Dionne Stephens, who's a professor at Florida International University. And we came together to write this book because there's not one book that centers on all these topics, like everything Black women. And we wrote it with Black women in mind, like Black women are our audience, but also the book is open to anybody who's interested in learning more. But the focus is, the audience is on Black women. And so when we think about mental health, and that is one chapter, there's so many different things that impact the mental health of Black women, right? Or how mental health can, if one does not have, mental wellness, right? Like that can impact how she may show up as a family member, as a wife, as a mother, as an employee. And so there's everything you want to know about Black women is in the book, but it also helps Black women to think about and to see their own experiences and how their own experiences may be related to, other Black women's experiences, or how their experiences may be somewhat unique. And so the book focuses on all the research, psychological research from sociology, education, Black women's studies, to see what do we know so far about Black women, and also how this research can be used to impact and inform policy. And so it's really almost everything is in the book as it relates to, Black women's identity development. So a lot of what we talked about earlier in the podcast about the strong Black woman image, how do Black women's identity development alter or change over time? How we talk about their experiences in education, starting through K through 12, into graduate studies, and then also how Black women has been an integral part in Black women's educational development as it relates to, the role of Black women as educators, as principals, as college presidents, as professors. We talk about Black women's sexuality, and looked at it more from a positive aspect of it, because oftentimes Black women are deemed as being, sexually promiscuous and engaging in a lot of sexual risk behaviors. But oftentimes we don't talk about the positive aspects of Black women's sexuality. So we mentioned that. As I mentioned a little bit earlier, we have a chapter on Black women's religion and spirituality, aging among Black women and what that looks like, violence against Black women, activism of Black women. So it's so many topics. Some of the things that I share with my students, or that students have shared with me, is that they see themselves in this book. They learn more about themselves. And a lot over the course of a semester, 16 weeks course, a lot of my students say that they just change the ways in which they see themselves as a Black woman, because now they just kind of learn more about the research, because oftentimes we're fed with this information that may be misinformation about Black women. A lot of people, now get information from social media, but oftentimes they may not have time to really dissect and do their own research about, is this credible information? And so this textbook, even though it's research, and so some of the research may not be generalizable to all Black women, but I know that Black women will be able to find themselves in the book and just learn more about themselves. And then also, hopefully, the goal is that we couldn't go in depth in everything, but that maybe it's a topic that a Black woman is really interested in. It will encourage further exploration on different topics. And then also at the end of each chapter, we have something called it's like a career corners. And so Black women, if they're like really interested in a particular chapter or topic, we have like careers associated with that. So we're trying to also enhance like career development. And so thinking about these alternative career pathways too, of like, hey, if you're really interested in this topic, these are maybe some careers that you may want to consider going into.
Wow. That's awesome.
Thank you.
That's awesome. I love it.
Thank you.
100%. And I will have to pick up a copy of that book. Where can we purchase the book?
Yes, so you can purchase a lot of different websites. The main one will be the publisher of the book is Rowman and Littlefield. So if you go to their website, or if you put in the Rowman and Littlefield Psychology of Black Womanhood, it'll pop up and you can get the ebook, paperback book, or the hard copy of the book. And also like Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. So a lot of different websites. And then also we have, Dr. Stephens and I have a website called Psychology of Black Womanhood.com. And so you can also purchase the book from there. And we have a lot of additional resources on the book. We also have a podcast as well, where we interview Black women scholars who we cited in the book, and they just expand upon their research. And so it's kind of where research meets the real world. So, but also other resources, even if people are interested in using the book as a teaching resource, we have a lot of teaching resources as well on our website, Psychology of Black Womanhood.
Cool. Thank you. So before we start to wrap it up, for a Black woman listening right now who's struggling but hesitant to seek therapy, what is the one thing that you tell her?
So I would tell her that you're human and that you are enough, and that this is a critical time for you to put yourself first, and that for so long you may have been putting the needs of others before your own, and this is the moment to put your needs first. And so I want you to start with the Google search. Another resource is looking at therapy for Black girls. They have a directory of Black women therapists. Also, Psychology Today has a directory of therapists, and so start there, but know that this is the opportunity to put yourself first. And so that's what I want you to do, is take that first step and to put so much and pour so much into yourself as you've been doing for others.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I love it. Well, Dr. Dickens, this conversation has been so necessary. Thank you so much for your wonderful words of wisdom and your practical strategies with us today. You know, we understand that mental health is truly essential. You know what I mean? It's not something that's just like, oh, it's okay. No, it's essential. We need it. And so I just want to say thank you so much for just being a part of the FAB Chicks podcast today and sharing with us all of your insight and just valuable resources and gems.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. And I love this platform. So continue to do what you all are doing. It's important to, like you said, integrate faith and spirituality, religion with mental health. And so thank you for having me, and thank you for creating this platform.
Absolutely.
Definitely. And for our Fab Chick listeners, I have a challenge for you. Please share this episode with a sister, a friend, or even your mom. Like every Black woman that you know. Let's make mental health a priority for our community.
Absolutely. And don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss an episode. So until next time, stay faith-filled, authentic, and bold. Peace.
Bye.